I never thought Thanksgiving could break me. Last year, I walked into my husband's family home believing I had finally found a place to belong. Instead, my sister-in-law, Emily, smiled sweetly as she drove the knife in deeper. "You're not invited this year." My husband said nothing. My mother-in-law lowered her eyes. I stood there humiliated, dismissed like I didn't matter. They thought they had erased me from their perfect holiday. They thought silence meant weakness. But what they didn't know was that silence was my weapon, and I was already planning a comeback that would change everything. The first time I married into a family, I believed holidays would finally mean warmth. For 35 years, I had watched from the outside, other people's dinners, other people's laughter, other people's traditions. When I walked through the doors of my husband's family home that crisp November evening, I thought I was stepping into my own version of belonging. The house smelled of cinnamon and roasted squash, the kind of scent that pulls you into a dream. For a moment, I let myself believe that this was my dream too. Emily, my sister-in-law, moved gracefully across the kitchen, commanding everyone's attention without saying much. She was older, sharper, the kind of woman whose smile never reached her eyes. She glanced at me once, her lips curving upward in what could have been mistaken for kindness if I hadn't noticed the quick flicker of disdain. I tried to ignore it. After all, this was supposed to be family, wasn't it? "Sarah," she said lightly, "do you even know how to roast a turkey? Or is takeout more your style?" Her voice floated over the counter, sugary but dripping with poison. Laughter bubbled from the cousins at the table, and I forced a smile, as if her words hadn't pierced through my skin. I told myself it was harmless teasing. I told myself families joked this way. But deep down, I felt the sharp sting of being sized up and dismissed. I carried the cranberry sauce to the table like an obedient guest, not a wife who belonged. My husband caught my eye, but quickly looked away, busying himself with the wine glasses. As the night stretched on, I realized I was a shadow in their house. Every story circled back to Emily. Every laugh was louder when she spoke. She thrived in the spotlight, and when she wanted silence, she turned it into a weapon. Then it came, the sentence that sliced through the evening like glass breaking on tile. "By the way," Emily said, her tone casual as though she were commenting on the weather, "this year, we're keeping Thanksgiving small, just immediate family. Sarah, you don't need to come." The room froze. Forks hovered in midair. I looked around for someone, anyone, to defend me. My mother-in-law shifted in her chair, eyes glued to her napkin. My husband took a sip of wine as if nothing had been said. The silence was louder than Emily's words. Heat rushed up my neck, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. She hadn't just uninvited me, she had erased me, and they all let it happen. I swallowed the lump in my throat, forcing a laugh that sounded foreign even to my own ears. "Oh, of course," I said, "if that's what's best." My hands shook beneath the tablecloth, but I smiled, always smiling, always polite. Inside, I felt myself cracking. Later that night, as coats were gathered and hugs exchanged, Emily leaned closer, her perfume sweet and suffocating. "Don't take it personally," she whispered, her breath brushing against my ear. "We just want to keep things traditional." I nodded like I believed her, but I knew the truth. Tradition had nothing to do with it. At home, the silence between my husband and me grew heavy. I waited for him to say something, anything, to defend me. Instead, he muttered, "Maybe it's just easier this way, Sarah. Maybe you should sit this one out." The betrayal in his voice was almost worse than Emily's cruelty. He wasn't just failing to protect me. He was agreeing with her. By the time I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized I was completely alone. They didn't see me as part of their family. They saw me as disposable. But what hurt most wasn't Emily's words. It was the way she twisted them afterward. The next morning, I woke to a text in the family group chat. "So grateful Sarah understands and wants to give us space this year. She's so considerate. Emily had written it as though I had willingly bowed out, as though I had chosen to exclude myself. And everyone responded with heart emojis and thank yous, praising me for a decision I never made. Gaslighting. That's what it was. She had rewritten the narrative, turned me into the volunteer exile. And the worst part? They believed her. My husband said nothing. My mother-in-law added, "That's why we love you, Sarah. Always so selfless." I stared at the screen, my throat tightening, my chest heavy with humiliation. It wasn't enough for Emily to push me out. She needed the world to believe I had walked out on my own. I could have screamed. I could have called her out, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence settle in, because silence, I realized, was my only shield, and maybe if I used it wisely, it could be my weapon. I looked at the phone one last time before setting it face down on the nightstand. Emily thought she had ended the game. She thought she had silenced me. But what she didn't know was that the game had only just begun. The morning after Emily's group chat ambush, I moved through the house as if I were a ghost. My husband sipped his coffee, scrolling on his phone, avoiding my eyes. I played the role they had written for me, the quiet, fragile wife who had politely excused herself from the family celebration. Every word I spoke was measured, soft, submissive. I even forced a small laugh when he mentioned how peaceful this Thanksgiving would be. Let them believe I was weak. Let them write me off. That was exactly what I needed. Emily bloomed in my silence. She sent pictures of the Thanksgiving preparations to the family chat, her smiling face front and center, captions dripping with pride. I pressed the heart emoji on her posts, feeding her ego, giving her the satisfaction of victory. The truth? I was feeding her arrogance until it blinded her. Inside, however, my despair simmered into something else. There's a point where humiliation hardens into resolve, where silence ceases to be surrender and becomes strategy. That night, while my husband watched TV in the living room, I sat alone in the bedroom, laptop balanced on my knees. The screen lit up, and with it, the life I had kept hidden. Folders neatly arranged, investment reports, shareholder updates, projections, names of companies scrolled before me, one highlighted above all, Luminatech. Emily thought she'd destroyed me, but she had no idea who she was really dealing with. I wasn't just the woman she mocked over turkey. I wasn't the disposable wife she painted me to be. I had built something long before I walked into her family's house, something no one in that room could touch. 3 years earlier, before I met my husband, I had poured nearly all my savings into a small startup run by 2 young engineers. Everyone had laughed at me for betting on a dream instead of playing it safe. I didn't laugh. I believed in it. I nurtured it. And now, Luminatech was no longer a fragile dream. It was a storm about to break. The IPO announcement sat in my inbox, bold and undeniable. I scrolled through the latest figures. Projected valuation in the billions, my modest investment multiplied beyond anything Emily or anyone in that family could imagine. My chest tightened, not from fear this time, but from the quiet thrill of holding a secret so powerful it could level their entire perception of me. I had never told my husband, not because I didn't trust him once, but because I valued humility, privacy, independence. I didn't need validation. I didn't need applause. I had chosen silence because it was mine to keep. But now, that silence became my weapon. I leaned back against the pillows, staring at the ceiling, imagining Emily's face if she ever discovered the truth. The way her smug smile would falter, the way her voice would stutter when she realized the sister-in-law she had dismissed as irrelevant was, in fact, wealthier and more powerful than she could ever dream to be. The irony tasted sweet. She had banned me from Thanksgiving, but she couldn't ban me from the empire I had built. She couldn't uninvite me from the reality where I was already far beyond her reach. I closed my laptop, the click loud in the silence of the room. This wasn't the time to reveal everything. Not yet. Timing was everything, and I wanted Emily to believe she had won for just a little longer. The higher she climbed on her false throne, the harder she would fall when the truth crushed her. From the living room, I heard the faint echo of my husband laughing at the television. His silence yesterday still burned, but instead of breaking me, it clarified my purpose. He had chosen to stand aside, to let me be erased. Fine. Let him think I was erased. Because I knew something none of them knew. I wasn't erased. I was rewriting the script. The world saw me as quiet, polite, insignificant. Emily saw me as a defeated rival. My husband saw me as someone who would eventually forgive, but I knew better. I had lived too many years learning how to survive invisibility, and now invisibility would make me unstoppable. This wasn't about shouting or begging for a seat at their table. This was about patience. This was about building the kind of power that didn't need permission, the kind that would one day force them to look at me, not as a nuisance, but as a storm they never saw coming. The decision crystallized in my mind as I stared at the darkened screen of my laptop. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no screaming match that could be twisted against me. I would not lower myself to her level. No, my silence would speak louder than her cruelty. My silence would terrify her. And when the moment came, when the numbers went public, when Luminatech's name lit up the headlines and my shares transformed me from dismissed outsider to untouchable force, then she would know. Then they would all know. For now, I played my part. I stayed quiet, small, invisible. But inside, the plan was already alive, breathing, growing. Emily thought she had ended the story when she shut me out of Thanksgiving. She thought silence meant defeat, but I knew better. Silence was only the beginning. Confidence has a strange way of settling in after humiliation. It doesn't arrive as fireworks or bold declarations. It seeps in quietly, steady and cold, until one day you realize the fear that once ruled you has dissolved into something sharper. That was where I stood weeks after Emily's declaration. Outwardly, I remained the weak, compliant wife. Inwardly, I was studying the game board and plotting every move with precision. Family gatherings continued. I still attended birthdays, Sunday dinners, the occasional casual brunch, and every time Emily made sure to turn me into the punchline. "Sarah, did you burn the salad again?" she sneered once, her voice dripping with sarcasm while others chuckled. At another dinner, she commented, "Don't take it personally, but some people just don't fit into family traditions." My cheeks burned, but I smiled, nodding politely, keeping the mask of submission firmly in place. What Emily never realized was that her cruelty only gave me more material, because I had started recording. It began small, my phone angled on the table, microphone capturing snippets of her voice. But soon I invested in something better, a tiny camera hidden inside a decorative brooch I wore. The first time I replayed the footage, hearing her mocking me behind my back to her friends in the kitchen, something in me shifted. No longer was it just my word against hers. Now I had proof. I cataloged everything carefully. The smirk on her lips when she called me dead weight. The way she whispered to another relative, "She's not family, she's just paperwork." Each clip went into a neatly labeled folder on my laptop, a digital gallery of her mask slipping. Then came the jackpot. At a late-night gathering, after too many glasses of wine, Emily cornered one of her cousins near the fireplace. My brooch caught it all. She leaned in, voice low but clear. "I'll get her out. One way or another, Sarah doesn't belong here. I want her gone, and I'll make sure she disappears." I paused the video halfway through, my hands trembling not from fear, but from exhilaration. For the first time, I wasn't the victim of her cruelty. I was the keeper of her downfall. I saved the file under a name I wouldn't forget, Emily Confession MP4. Still, I didn't rush. That was the beauty of patience. If I revealed it too soon, she could spin the story, gaslight again, twist truth into lies. But if I waited, if I allowed her to keep spiraling, if I let her dig her own grave while I held the shovel, then the impact would be undeniable. My silence became her obsession. "Why doesn't she fight back?" I overheard her ask once, frustration leaking into her tone. "It's like she doesn't even care." Her need for reaction was eating her alive, and the more she lashed out, the more the cracks showed. Relatives began to exchange uneasy glances at her jokes. My mother-in-law once cleared her throat awkwardly when Emily's laughter stretched too far. The tide was shifting and Emily sensed it, though she couldn't explain why. That was when I released my first move. At a casual dinner, while talk of rising living costs circled the table, I mentioned it almost offhandedly. "I've been watching Luminatech's numbers climb. It's fascinating to see how a small company can transform so quickly." The room went quiet for a beat too long. My husband blinked. Emily's fork froze midair. She masked it quickly, scoffing, "Oh, Sarah, don't tell me you read finance blogs now." But her voice lacked its usual confidence. I didn't elaborate. I just smiled. The silence that followed was louder than any boast could have been. It was enough to plant suspicion in Emily's mind, enough to make her wonder what I knew, what I had. She hated not knowing. Over the next few days, she sent me texts dripping with false sweetness, as though probing for answers. "Hey, did you say you've been into investing? That's so interesting." I replied with nothing but polite, empty lines. The less I gave her, the more frantic she became. Her power was unraveling, thread by thread, and she knew it. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, Emily struck back. At the next family dinner, she raised her glass and announced loudly, "Some people here like to pretend they're more important than they are. But let's be honest, not everyone can handle the real world. Some people are just playing dress-up." Her eyes burned into mine, daring me to crumble. I didn't flinch. What Emily didn't realize was that her attack wasn't hurting me. It was exposing her. Everyone saw her bitterness, her desperation, the edge of hysteria in her laughter. She had stepped into the trap all by herself, and I was ready. For weeks, I had gathered proof, built patience, and let Emily perform her cruelty until she became a caricature of herself. But revenge, true revenge, was never about one sharp blow. It was about letting the world see the truth without me ever lifting a weapon. That moment came on a Monday morning when Luminatech's name appeared on every financial news outlet in the country. The headlines were everywhere. Luminatech to go public at historic valuation. My phone buzzed relentlessly as reporters dissected the IPO, calling it one of the most anticipated of the year. Buried in those articles, in small print at first, was my name, Sarah Miller, early investor, philanthropic partner. The world was beginning to connect the dots. By noon, I made my move. I signed the final documents authorizing a 7-figure donation to a scholarship fund for underprivileged women in tech. It wasn't just charity, it was a statement. When the press release went live, my inbox flooded. Reporters wanted quotes. Community leaders sent gratitude. LinkedIn swarmed with connection requests. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, sipping tea, watching my name scroll across the bottom ticker of the evening news. Local Women's Investment Success Fund's nationwide scholarship initiative. The same family who once applauded Emily for her charity bake sales was now watching me on television, not as a guest at their table, but as a name in every household. Emily's silence was deafening. 2 days later, she tried to seize control. On social media, she posted a long message about her own philanthropy, attaching pictures of herself handing out blankets at a shelter. But the comments betrayed her desperation. "Isn't this Sarah Miller's initiative?" someone asked. Another wrote, "Why are you trying to compete with her?" For once, Emily's carefully polished image cracked. I didn't need to confront her. I didn't need to argue. The world was speaking for me. Every article, every headline, every thank you note was a mirror showing her exactly what she wasn't. And then her own storm hit. Rumors began to spread that Emily's boutique investment firm had mishandled client funds. Whispers turned into stories. A former colleague accused her of misrepresentation. Soon, local papers picked up the scandal, hinting at investigations. I didn't lift a finger. I didn't need to. While my name was being celebrated, hers was being dragged through mud. She had mixed herself. At dinners, relatives who once chuckled at her jokes now avoided her gaze. Her laughter, once infectious, rang hollow. She tried to boast about her connections, but no one listened. The more she fought to hold on, the faster she slipped. And I remained calm. I didn't gloat, didn't raise my voice, didn't expose the recordings I kept locked away. There was no need. Sometimes destruction doesn't come from fire, it comes from silence. The family gathering after the news broke was unlike any I had attended before. The air was thick with unease. Emily arrived late, her makeup heavier than usual, her smile brittle. Conversations hushed as she entered, but no one rose to greet her. Then I walked in. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. The room shifted as if gravity itself had realigned. My presence was no longer invisible. It was undeniable. My mother-in-law's eyes widened, my husband stiffened, and Emily's painted smile faltered, trembling at the edges. I set my bag down gently, folding my hands in front of me, and stood in the silence that grew heavier by the second. No grand speeches, no demands, just my existence, transformed. The woman they had dismissed, uninvited, erased, stood before them not as a victim but as proof that power does not scream, power does not beg, power waits then arrives in silence, leaving no room for denial. Emily looked at me across the table, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. She had built her kingdom on manipulation, but mine was built on truth, and truth had finally taken its place. Victory tastes sweet at first, like honey on the tongue, but it doesn't linger. It turns heavy, almost bitter when you realize what it costs. In the weeks following my public rise, invitations poured in. Conferences, galas, interviews. My name circulated in boardrooms and community halls. I had become the woman everyone wanted to be near, the symbol of triumph against doubt. But with each handshake and each congratulation, I felt the weight settle deeper. Power isolates. I was no longer invisible, but I was also no longer ordinary. At night, I sat alone in hotel rooms after speaking engagements, staring at city skylines that stretched endlessly, wondering why victory felt so quiet. My husband had changed, too. He was polite, attentive in public, smiling for the cameras when we attended events together. To outsiders, we were the perfect couple, successful, harmonious, glowing. Yet behind closed doors, the distance grew. Conversations felt rehearsed. His compliments were timed, hollow, like lines from a script he no longer believed in. One evening, after another charity dinner, I confronted him gently. "Do you feel proud?" I asked, my voice soft, almost tentative. He glanced at me, then looked away, his jaw tight. "Of course, you've accomplished so much." But his eyes betrayed him. They didn't hold pride. They held calculation. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered into his study. Papers lay scattered across his desk, and curiosity tugged at me. I shuffled through them, financial statements, emails, notes. My breath caught when I saw my own name. He had known. He had known about my investments, about Luminatech, about the fortune that had quietly grown in the background of our marriage. Not only had he known, he had stayed silent. The realization sliced through me. He hadn't defended me against Emily, not because he didn't understand my worth, but because he was protecting himself. He didn't want to be tied to me when the truth surfaced, not until he was sure which way the wind would blow. His silence hadn't been weakness, it had been self-preservation. I sank into his chair, my chest heavy. The victory I thought I had claimed suddenly felt tainted. Was I any different from Emily now? She manipulated with words and presence. I manipulated with silence and power. Was I slowly turning into the very thing I despised? The question haunted me in every quiet moment. At press conferences, while applause thundered, my mind whispered, "This isn't who you wanted to be." But the answer came not from doubt, but from revelation. A slip in conversation, a careless remark. One night, over dinner, my husband said, "Emily thought you'd never survive in this family. Honestly, we didn't think so either." We. The word struck harder than any insult Emily had ever thrown at me. He hadn't been a bystander. He had been part of it from the beginning. The memory unraveled itself. The way he avoided eye contact when Emily humiliated me. The way he repeated her words under the guise of advice. The way he never once questioned her motives. He hadn't just tolerated her cruelty. He had enabled it. Rage and sorrow twisted inside me, equal parts heartbreak and clarity. The betrayal ran deeper than I imagined. This had never been a battle between me and Emily alone. It had been a war staged by the very people who should have protected me. And the one I shared a bed with, the man I trusted most, was my truest enemy. I looked at him across the dinner table that night, his features calm, as though nothing had shifted. But everything had. I saw him now, not as my husband, not as my partner, but as a stranger wearing the mask of loyalty. The irony was cruel. Emily had wanted me erased, but in the end, it wasn't her cruelty that cut deepest. It was his silence. His betrayal was quieter, subtler, but infinitely sharper. When I excused myself from the table and retreated to the bedroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror. My face looked composed, but my eyes burned. The woman staring back at me wasn't a victim anymore, but she wasn't free either. She was standing on the edge of a revelation that would destroy the last illusions she had clung to. For the first time since Thanksgiving began this cruel journey, I felt the full weight of loneliness, not the loneliness of being excluded, but the loneliness of knowing the people closest to me had sharpened the knives. I closed my eyes, gripping the edge of the sink, and let the truth settle into me like stone. This was no longer about Emily. It was no longer about winning the approval of a family that had never wanted me. This was about survival, and survival meant seeing the enemy clearly, even when he shared your home, your bed, your name. Power had carried me far, but it had not given me peace. The truth about my husband's betrayal sat heavy inside me, colder than any humiliation Emily had ever inflicted. I had won the public war, yes. My name in headlines, my fortune acknowledged, my work celebrated. Yet the battlefield inside the family remained scorched earth. No amount of wealth could rewrite what had already been carved into their bones. They had never wanted me, never seen me, never loved me. For days, I paced the silence of my home, the distance between my husband and me stretching into something unrecognizable. I thought about the recordings of Emily, the scandals that had already begun to erode her reputation, the arsenal of evidence I still held. I could bury her completely. I could even expose my husband, drag him down in the same tide. The temptation whispered at me in the dark. Revenge could still be mine. But with each whisper came another question. And then what? Would their downfall heal the wound they had carved? Would more destruction fill the hollow place where belonging had once been promised? Or would I simply become another reflection of them? Merciless, empty, consumed by bitterness. The answer came slowly like dawn after the longest night. I didn't need their apology. I didn't need their approval, and I didn't need revenge anymore. The game they had forced me into, the rules Emily had written, the silence my husband had chosen, it was all a prison disguised as family. And I was done playing. Thanksgiving arrived with its usual chill in the air, the scent of roasted turkey drifting down suburban streets. This time, I did not wait for an invitation. I dressed carefully, not to impress, but to embody the woman I had become, poised, unshaken, unafraid. I walked into their house carrying nothing but myself. The table was set, the chatter subdued. Emily sat stiffly, her once commanding presence dulled by scandal and shame. My husband looked at me with a flicker of unease. my mother-in-law with thinly veiled discomfort. For a moment, the air held the same oppressive weight it always had. But I was not the same. I stood at the head of the table, letting the silence stretch until every eye settled on me. My voice was calm, steady, almost gentle. I need you all to hear me clearly. I don't need your acceptance. I don't need your permission, and I don't need to fight you anymore. The words fell into the room like stones in water, rippling outward. Emily's lips parted, but no sound came. My husband shifted uncomfortably, his fork clattering against his plate. I see now, I continued, that no victory, no headline, no fortune will ever change what you are, or what you've done. And that's fine, because I no longer measure myself by your standards. You don't have to erase me. I'm already gone from your game. I stepped back, the weight lifting from my chest as if chains had been cut. For the first time, I felt free, not because I had beaten them, but because I no longer cared to. When I turned to leave, no one stopped me. Emily sat frozen, powerless in the silence she once wielded. My husband's mouth opened, then closed, as if the right words had never existed for him. My mother-in-law bowed her head, unable to meet my gaze, and I walked away. Out the door, into the crisp November air, the cold biting at my cheeks but warming me all the same. I didn't cry this time. I didn't shake. Instead, I smiled. Small, steady, real. Inside that house, the family fractured further, their power games collapsing without me as their target. Emily's throne had already crumbled, my husband's loyalty exposed for what it was. Their silence was no longer my burden. It was their prison now. As I drove away, the city lights stretched out before me like a promise. My story was no longer tied to them, no longer defined by what they had taken or denied. It was mine to write, free of their shadows. And perhaps that was the truest victory of all. Not revenge, not power, not even justice, just freedom. The world would remember me as the woman who turned humiliation into triumph. But I would remember myself as the woman who walked away, unbroken, untethered, alive.